final speaker, really ready. And I'm going to, where's my slides? Slides. Where's my So to finish up, and I need to switch. Yeah, this one. Preparing my stuff. Yeah. So to sum everything up, we have Adam Englander. He's a software engineer, and we'll be talking about making PHP smarter, introducing AI to PHP applications, because AI is now the big thing. And who else to talk about it than Adam? So I'm going to invite him in, pop it up, host and speaker. Yeah. Oop, sorry. Here. Yeah. Here you are, Adam. How are you? You are on mute.
Great.
Okay.
Hope everybody's not been too numb
Tired?
from hearing
No.
everything all day for 6
No.
hours.
We just ate. I don't know. Probably you seen that, but we just ate an entire elephant. So we may be a little bit sleepy, but your energy will spice everyone up and will be fire everyone to be aware of your talk. And you're speaking about AI. So what's best to talk on 2023 than AI, because AI is everywhere.
Exactly.
So without further ado, I'm going to. Do you have your slides ready? Can you
I
add
do.
them?
Let me present them.
Yeah, if you don't mind.
Hopefully they're coming through.
They're here. Okay, so I'll let you carry on. See you in a bit.
All right. Thanks.
Oh, I'm keep on pressing the buttons and on the wrong time, man. Sorry about that. So
No
I'm going
worries.
to leave.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Adam Englander. As he said, I'm going to be talking about making PHP smarter and introducing AI to PHP applications. First, a warning, there will be gross oversimplification ahead. So a lot of the material included is, again, oversimplified. The materials are meant to provide insight into how things work to kind of remove some of the mystery and improve confidence for developers who are not data scientists and statisticians in using AI in their application. So on a brief introduction into AI, so I guess the first thing to start off with is what actually is artificial intelligence, right? So if you talk to dictionaries, they tell you that it's the ability of a digital computer or computer-controlled robot to perform tasks commonly associated with intelligent beings. You probably have that kind of in the back of your head anyway, and it's something that's been around for a very long time, right? That definition is very old. The concept of AI has been around for nearly 90 years, soon after the idea of computing, electric computers, computing systems were kind of devised. The idea of replacing, or a computer that could do things that humans could do, was immediately thought of. And for nearly 90 years, they've been working on that. In the last 5 years, on this timeline where you see large language models, it's exploded. So large language models are what give you the ability to do kind of general generative AI, things like ChatGPT or Midjourney. And they're getting a lot of popularity because people can just talk to something and it'll give you something that you want most of the time, especially if you know how to talk to them. And with ChatGPT 4 and the latest version of Midjourney, they've gotten really, really, really good. And there are other, I'll talk about these because these are the most popular, but there are a lot of other systems that are coming up. So we have these new AI tools available, and but how would you use them? And there are common use cases for enhancing your applications with AI, and these are the ones that get used the most. Classification is one of the oldest ways to enhance your applications. used other types of models, but today we don't have to worry about training and generating models. We don't need a data scientist to do most things. It allows you to just send a request to an AI system and get the answer, right? So I had a problem with pay-per-call recently, which is how you submit for events online, this one included. And I wasn't able to log in using Twitter/X, still can't. But you can classify a message. So let's say you also have a support system, or you have a way that people communicate with you and you want to be able to route those appropriately. One way to do that is by classifying the messages. So you can take the input message, you can ask an LLM, right, an artificial intelligence LLM, to classify, right? So this is the actual input that I put in. I added the message to it, and it told me that this was pertained to login. I didn't have to train anything. I didn't have to do anything. I just sent the request, and it was able to do it. Summarization is something that is problematic for, I think, most high school and college instructors. But for your PHP applications, if you need to summarize things, let's say you have a blog post that you want to summarize, or you have a long description that you want a one-sentence description for a product on a shopping cart, or whatever the case may be. These types of systems are very good at doing summarization, right? So I took this 4-paragraph explanation, told it to summarize it into a sentence, and it gave me a long but single sentence. Sentiment analysis. So if you want to know if people are happy or unhappy, one place that this is super popular to do is in whether it might be an email coming in to see if someone's angry, and determine if you want to escalate it, right? Give it a higher level than people that are just being nice, or who's flaming you on social media platforms, right? So if you can just give it a social media post and ask it to identify the sentiment as satisfied or unsatisfied, or however, whatever sentiment you want to determine, it can actually determine the sentiment. Again, you just ask the AI to do that, and it can do it. It can also enhance your user experiences. So the common user experience for customer service, right, is that, like, I want to figure out, and this is something I was actually doing, is how do I host a large language module in Microsoft Azure? I can go to the Microsoft Azure site and I can search, and it'll give me documents. And strangely enough, it is not as simple as you might think to find out how to host a large language model in Azure. I have to go through a bunch of documents, and I have to go click on links inside those documents and go down wrong paths and some right paths. But if I ask something like ChatGPT-4 to give me a step-by-step instructions, it will actually just give me step-by-step instructions. So for most users, that is a much better user experience of asking a question and getting a specific answer, as opposed to asking a question and saying, well, here's 100 documents that may give you what you need. So it's very good at being able to, again, summarize information, and it'll even allow you to generate instructions on how to do things. Smarter decision making. So if you are like me and you have made decision trees, or you have made some sort of logic engine, those are highly complex. They take a very senior engineer to be able to do well, and an immense amount of testing and an immense amount of upkeep. LLMs, large language models, and right, what most people think of as AI, are very good at making complex decisions. That is their entire reason for existing. So given enough information, you could actually have it make decisions on which is the best thing to do based on these particular criteria. Here is the information. What should I do? And it will do that. Assessing user need. So it's not necessarily a direct usage, but it's something that I found in some implementations that I have, is we started tracking the interactions for a user session, because if there's something going on and your customers aren't happy, you don't waiting for them to tell you is problematic because they're just not going to use you most of the time, as opposed to telling you why they're not using you. So being able to understand the sentiment of what's going on with the users can be super, super important. And the way that you might do it now is you have to go look at logs. So if I want to, on the left side, this is a non-AI assisted, right? You're looking at, this is a user session for someone trying to figure out how to create and reduce a vector. You might be able to assume that if you understood the content and what was in it and what people normally do, you might be able to figure that out. But you won't be able to figure out when they left why they left, and if they got everything that they wanted, right? Where in an AI assisted session, you'd come and you'd say, well, how do I create a vector? Oh, great, I know how to create a vector. How do I reduce it? And do you have more examples, right? Because there aren't really a lot of examples on reduce, but you wouldn't know that that was missing. Someone just left. So if you had product pages and you didn't have enough information, or you were doing product support and they weren't able to find their answer, you wouldn't know if they found the answer or not, because you're just looking at web pages and what they viewed as opposed to what their intent was. So assessing the user need can tell you how successful your systems are, as well as you can pass this back in, right? You can take this session, pass it back into an LLM like ChatGPT and ask it sentiment, right? So what were they trying to do? Did they seem happy or unhappy, right? Because strangely enough, when you're doing AI assisted and you're doing kind of a chat interaction, people will on chatbots and sometimes on humans don't have a problem expressing their anger, right? So when someone's not happy with a chatbot, they will tell it is stupid and ridiculous, and a lot of other things you probably don't want to discuss. So being able to understand how your users actually feel is something that you can do better through logs of an AI session than you can through just kind of standard logs. So now that we've talked about some of the standard use cases, there's more use cases, but they're a lot more complicated use cases. So, and I don't really have time to get into them today because we're kind of limited in time. So the first thing I want to talk to is how to get started with generative AI. So when I'm talking about AI today, there's a lot of AI is a very big thing. But what most people are familiar with and talking about, they're talking about general generative AI. So that's things like ChatGPT, Midjourney, and anything else that is similar to it. Things that are, you give it text, it is not trained on anything specific. You give it text, and it will do something, return something for you. It'll generate text, it'll generate images, it'll generate music, videos, those types of things. So these systems come in two ways to usually interact with them. There's also image completion, but you're usually doing the same thing. So chat completion versus text completion, they're pretty similar, but you have to think about how you're talking in a different way. When you're doing chat completion, you can create you're required to give roles. So you can have personas like the system, right? The system message is, here's how you interact. And then the human interaction is what you actually are asking or what you want it to do. So it has a very good idea on, these are the things that are specific to what I do, and these are the things that you're asking. Where if you're doing text completion, you need to be more specific in what you're saying to let it know that here are instructions on what to do on this thing that's coming afterwards. So if you're using ChatGPT, you're using chat completion, but OpenAI and Hugging Face models and things like that have a lot of other ways of interacting with it. So one that's kind of the two most common, though, really are chat completion and text completion. So tokens, temperature, and top blank. And these are variation restrictions on your requests. And they're important to understand. So when we talk about restrictions, we're talking about tokens. So the way that neural networks work is they have a limited amount of input, a maximum amount of input that they can process. And the way that large language models, which are what people consider AI today, ingest that is through tokens. So these systems will translate your incoming request, your incoming text and chat into tokens, and that will be no more than a word or punctuation. And I'm sorry, no less than a word or punctuation, and maybe multiple tokens per word. And there are, again, always a restriction on the number of tokens, and you will usually be billed per token on top of any other standard fee. Unless you're hosting your own model, if you're using just an API where you're accessing somebody else's model, they're going to charge you per token. So you should be cognizant of how much you're sending and how much you're receiving, because that can affect your overall cost of your system. Temperature is an odd thing to call it, but basically it's how much divergence you want between results. So it normally is between 0 and 1, although OpenAI can theoretically go to 2. 0 means no divergence between results. You will, when you ask the same question, you always get the same answer. And that is great for decisioning and categorization, because you always want the same category and you always want the same result, the same decision. So you can adjust your input so that you're getting the correct output. And once you've adjusted the input, it's always going to have the same output. So that's super important in particular situations like that. Non-zero is great for kind of general user experience. You don't want it saying the exact same thing over and over again, and you may want it to give different answers, right? So if someone says, where should I go for my next vacation? You may have 5 completely viable answers, and you don't want to give the same answer every time. So depending on how much temperature you have determines on, does it just change some of the wording? Does it change some of the answers? And there's kind of an example here, right, where you ask it, the sky is blue in a single paragraph. The words are very similar, but the answer is the exact same, but it says it a little bit different way. So it can cut down on, like a chat system, it can cut down on just a constant repetition. That can be pretty annoying. So temperature is actually kind of a combination of 2 other things, right, which is top K and top P. So in configuring LLMs, when you send a request, you can configure, sometimes it'll have temperature, sometimes it'll have top P and top K. So top P is kind of the randomness in the response, and what words it's going to use. It will create a larger area for it to look into, and it will randomly select viable responses and then use that to, it will create a larger domain with which to use, and it will randomly pick pieces of that domain to use for its answer. Where top K doesn't use any of the random sampling, and it restricts it down to a much smaller domain. And you probably won't need to use these, but if you find that you're not getting consistent results, or you don't like the results you're getting, oftentimes altering top P and top K will allow you to get the answers that you want, right? It'll reduce either the randomness that you're not happy with, where sometimes it gives you JSON in double quotes, sometimes it gives it to you in single quotes. And you also may want to just, it's using too much information and getting wrong answers. So maybe you can you can tighten it down, and it may be more likely to get the right answer with less data, or you may need to expand it out, and it will get the right answer with more data. So again, for most use cases, it's not super necessary just to alter the dials on top P and top K, but just know that they're there. And if you're down to where it's almost there, but it's not quite what I want, you may be able to get what you need by top K and top P. Top N tends to be give me the top number of answers. So you'll see that a lot where when you're making requests, actually they just call it N in chat completion for OpenAI. This is the number of responses I want back. Sometimes you'll want a list of options. Sometimes you just want to have, you may want to randomize it yourself. Sometimes you just want one, right? So if you just want one response, you should just use an N of 1. If you want 5 responses, you may want an N of 5. And just remember, though, that the more information you return, the more tokens you're getting in the response, the more money that it costs you. So that may be a cost-specific saving there. that you're looking for that. So now that we've figured out how to kind of dial in well, I'd say we figured out, now that we've discussed how to dial in our requests, we can talk about embeddings. So embeddings are vectors stored in an index within a vector database. And what it really allows you to do is you take some text and turn it into a vector. If you remember your linear algebra, vectors is a lot of linear algebra, and it's actually using a lot of linear algebra when it uses it, and it sticks to the vector database. And the reason that you're doing that, right, is that, and what I tend to use it for the most, is you may have information that is too large to send, right? So I need an answer. Let's say we have a knowledge base, right? This one's like, the example is just an FAQ, but let's say you have a knowledge base that you want to give answers for. You can break up your knowledge base into manageable chunks, manageable small chunks, use them as embeddings, stick them in a vector database. Now, when you need to identify when somebody asks a question, you go ask your vector database for relevant data, right? Relevant chunks related to the question. Sometimes you can send the same question. If you're specifically doing things, you may have other ways that you want to restrict it down to make sure that you're getting the correct chunks. But the idea is that you're going to ask the vector database, find me the chunks that are related to this question. If you've ever used Elasticsearch, right? Elasticsearch is a vector database, and that's how it finds things that are like other things. And that's what you're really doing here, right? You're identifying relevant embeddings. And then once you have them, you'll send the request plus the chunks of relevant data along with the request to use as context. So you have an LLM, which is very generic and doesn't know your knowledge domain, right? But you can give it information about your knowledge domain for it to give really good human answers to it. It will evaluate the information that it has and then answer the question. And in order to reduce the amount that you're sending over and get it in within its restrictions, right? If you're using OpenAI, if you like, depending on your volume, right, you probably want to use ChatGPT 3.5, and it's got an 8K restriction for 8,000 tokens, which is about 8,000 words. So if you have a bunch of support documentation, that's not going to fit in 8,000, and you probably also don't want to send 8,000 tokens every time. That's going to be very expensive. So it's a great strategy for passing along chunks of data into the system, and allowing a very generic generative AI, a general generative AI, to provide information for a very specific knowledge domain. And this may also not be enough, right? It may end up costing too much because you're sending too much data, or it takes too long, or you can't have enough context, right? So if you're using chat, you're usually sending back old parts of the chat so that it has context, and if you have to send that back plus the context from the search, then it may just be too much information that you're sending along. And so once you've gone beyond what embeddings can do for you, you can always get into fine-tuning. So fine-tuning is a very advanced methodology that you can do kind of straight through an API, through both OpenAI and Hugging Face, which we're going to discuss the two main ways to access models today. And everything else will just kind of follow suit, is my estimation. But the way that fine-tuning works is actually how most LLMs work, right? They start with a base, right? So this is an example of StarCoder versus StarChat. So StarCoder is text completions and generating the next code from the code that you're running. There's even in the VS Code, there's a StarCoder plugin. So it'll start doing generative code completion for you. But you can't ask it a question. So you give it You give it a snippet of code, and it will say what it thinks the next thing is. But you can't ask it to, let's say, hey, write me, here's a PHP class, write me a unit test for this class. Or create me a class for this type of entity with these types of attributes. But Start Chat will. So the way you do that is you fine tune it using a data set. And so in this example, you're turning a text completion into an interactive chat system, but you can also turn something like ChatGPT into something that knows everything about your data, right? Because you would fine tune it with your data. And so instead of getting charged for every time you make a request, you send over context data from embeddings, you get charged for the fine tuning aspect. But from that point on, the data is just part of the model, and it's being sent, and it's using that to answer questions. So sometimes you're doing that for speed. Sometimes you're doing that for accuracy, because it can be the LLM can be better at making decisions on the full corpus, as opposed to you having to do something without much context using a vector database. Your mileage may vary as to how well that works for what you're trying to do. So now that we've kind of gone through, here's what AI is, here's how you talk to it generally, here's the configuration, and here's the extra things you might need to know to get it to work. Let's get started with OpenAI. And both OpenAI and Hugging Face are just APIs. So all you need to do is know how to make an HTTP request, and you can get all the things that you want from both of these systems. So I have an example here using Guzzle. I have no affiliation with Guzzle. I don't care what HTTP client you use. It's just the most popular one that I know of, and the one that I've used a lot before. And so basically, you're talking to the OpenAPI v1, right? There is a 60-second timeout here, because in examples, I want it to always work. And we'll get into it a little bit more, but responses can take a while, depending on your question and what you're actually talking to. It also requires an authorization header. It is not, don't get confused. It is saying bearer, but it is not OAuth. So you just put in your static OpenAI API key. Once you have your client, you start making requests against the model, right? And so this is where you're going to determine which model you're going to use. This one's using GPT-3.5 Turbo. GPT-3.5 Turbo is the least expensive, and the least limited as far as the number of tokens you can send per minute. Unless you're going to be using a lot of money, you're likely going to be using GPT-3.5 Turbo. And it's going to get a list of messages, right? So this is GPT-3.5, which means it's chat completion. And it also, you're posting 2 chat completions. And so you're going to have a list of messages. And each one of those messages is an associative array, which has a role and content. So the user asks this question. You would normally have some system messages as well, and maybe some older messages, right? So you might have some messages that came from the assistant if you're doing a chat system, but that won't fit on this page. But basically, you're just sending it an array of messages that you're going to go, and you'll get a body back when you're done. So that body is going to be large, and we'll go through each piece in each segment, right? So the first segment is the identifier for the request/response, right? It's going to tell you, here's the ID, and if you're getting complaints, you can find out, and you're logging those things, you can find out what the user was, who's doing things that are bad, the type of object, when it was created, and the model. So if you remember, back here, we told it GPT-3.5 Turbo, but it's actually much more specific as to which version of GPT-3.5 Turbo. I'm unaware of any way to pin the model in OpenAI at this time. So you're going to ask for GPT-3.5 Turbo, and if they update GPT-3.5 Turbo, you may get different answers. So if you find that one day you're getting different answers than you were the day before, go check to see the model being returned and see if it's different. You'll also get usage. Again, you're getting billed. So if you want to track that as you're going along and not trust OpenAI for their billing, you can figure out how many tokens you got, and oftentimes prompt and completion are a different cost. And then you'll get back choices. So this one, it defaults to an n of 0. And we talked about top n, right? So it returned one answer. And in this one, you're getting the index, which is, again, a sorted index of answers. No other information other than this is the sort order it chose. You'll get the message, which is the response, and the finish reason. So the finish reason, you can ask it when you're sending it questions, whether or not you want to respond with the first answer, respond with the best answer after a timeout, or just wait until you process all answers. And so it'll tell you why it returned, whether it was stopped, it timed out, or it returned. And that is really all there is, right? Just so you're create a message, fairly simple, send it, get the response back. It's I found it to be strangely easy to do, and to add to my applications was a fairly simple process. Hugging Face, you may or may not be familiar with Hugging Face, but it is the largest collection of open source and open access models available via API. When you start hearing in the news about new model released, you'll likely have a link to Hugging Face, where it's accessible and it's described, and the configuration for it is available if you wanted to use it to run or build, which usually requires Python. But if you are using PHP, you can access it through the Hugging Face API, and then what they call their inference API. So the inference API is very similar to what we just talked about for OpenAI. And so you're just another HTTP client. It's got a base URL. The timeout here is 300 seconds. And we'll talk about why in a moment. And again, same thing, authorization bearer and not OAuth, just the access token. You make a post, right? And you'll give it the model, depending on what type of model it is, if it's self-hosted or if it's part of their kind of free tier of things. You'll have a different way of accessing it, but the model page on their website will tell you where it is. You'll send it JSON, and again, it'll be you'll send inputs and wait for model. So that very long timeout was due to the fact that if you're using their internal hosting, their kind of free service, the models may or may not be running. Models are very expensive to run. They use very expensive hardware. And if it's not a super popular model that people are always running for free, it will shut it down. But a lot of the common ones, it will start back up when you make a request. So you can either wait for the model true, and it will wait for it to spin up, and then it will make the request and then send it back. There's also a wait for model false, which will just give you a 503, right? Service unavailable, and it will tell you that it's starting up the model. So if you're using this in production, you should not be using their internal things. This is just for kind of proof of concept. So you probably wouldn't wait for model. But for examples, I make sure they work. So wait for model is true, and the timeout is 300 seconds. So you'll get a body back, which is, of course, JSON. And by default, it's going to return 5. And you can change that. And you'll see some very different data here, right? So one thing it has is a score. And this is the probability score for the token. So what is the likelihood that this answer is the right answer? This is a nice thing that I really like about Hugging Face over OpenAI, is that you know how confident it is in its answer, right? OpenAI would return the same answer, but not tell you that it was only 17% confident. That's not a high level of confidence. And in your application, if you're using the Hugging Face inference API, you might say that I'm only going to accept their answer, accept the answer if it's 80% or higher. So that's a nice piece in there to let you know how it feels about what it's doing, so that you can determine if you want to use it or not. It's also how you'll sort which one is the most correct answer. You get a token ID. You get the token string. So this is the response to the mask, and then you'll get the sequence, which is the actual sequence of tokens that ran against the model. So that's your question plus the inserted token that you put in. So there's no documented order of the results. So you'll need to order them score, right? So do a quick usort, gives you a sorted order, pop off the end, and that's the final stuff. You can all set number to 1. You should only have one of them. But if you're 2 or 3, or you want to get the top, top 3 as long as it meets the criteria, you can do that and sort them in the proper order. I've never seen them come out of order. Where it usually the first one is the highest score, but there's no guarantee in the documentation that it's that way. So I always just sort it anyway because I don't trust people. Now, in Hugging Face models, there are different input requirements because there are different types of models. In OpenAI, you'll have different endpoints. In the Hugging Face inference API, you have the same endpoint. You're just passing different data in as your messages. So what you need to do is you're going to have to identify the requirements for a model. So the way that you do that in Hugging Face is you're going to go find the model in Hugging Face, and you're going to click on the deploy button, which will show you a dropdown. You're going to select the inference API, and it will show you the implementation information. That'll be in Python, JavaScript, and curl. Sorry, PHP folks, but they tend to do this stuff for just JavaScript and Python. But this is the information that I used for these example code, right? I was able to figure out like, okay, so here's the endpoint. Here is the information I'm going to send, right? So it sent a mask under inputs. And I was able to change that to what I wanted it to be. That's for token completion. But if I was going to do, let's say, conversational, it's different, right? Your inputs are very different. And so if you're going to be using the Hugging Face inference API, you're going to want to make sure that you're pointed in the right place and sending the right information so it knows how to process it. The responses come back in the same way for everything I've done so far. So there may be different ones, but I've never seen them. One word of caution on if it's a popular model, the information here is likely to be correct and up to date. If it's not a popular model, it may or may not be accurate, and it may or may not be up to date. So one thing to think about. So best practices. So we talked about it. Here's some things you do. Maybe you have an idea of how I want to do it. You saw this, you're like, wow, it's really easy to do. It always seems easy, right? It's never that easy. So there's some things that you've got to do if you're going to be doing these things in your applications. So the first thing that you're going to have to worry about is prompt engineering. So it's a super catchphrase, and it's actually becoming an actual title, prompt engineer, and people can make a bunch of money currently doing prompt engineering. But the idea here is that if you just say words in any particular order, the LLM may not understand what you're saying, right? It may misinterpret what you're doing, and it's going to give you a result that you're not looking for. So prompt engineering is learning how to ask the question in such a way that it gives you what you want, only what you want, and not what you don't want, right? Sometimes you even get down to the point of saying, I want you to give me this, 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 and this. I want you to have it in this particular format and never do this thing, right? There's a lot of work that goes into getting the answers the way that you want, especially in applications. So if you're just trying to get a result that you need to parse, process, and use inside of your application, getting it to format correctly is super important. Oftentimes, the way to do that is to tell it to return it in JSON, but sometimes it gives you invalid JSON. So telling the prompts never to use things like single quotes for the JSON response is super important. And again, it just depends on what it's doing for you and how well it's working. And so unfortunately, you have some things that kind of work, and each one of the APIs will have some kind of like best practices. But your mileage may vary on those best practices, and some of them may work and some of them may not. So just know that prompt engineering will be the majority of the work that you do when you're doing AI stuff in the beginning. General versus domain, right? So LLMs are very good at being general. They provide very vague answers. They also have a difficulty in disambiguating, right? So if you ask it about the city of San Jose, right, it doesn't know which one you're talking about, and it likely won't ask you which one you're talking about, and it will just give you an answer that could be wrong based on the one that you think you're asking about. So you can disambiguate some in your prompts, but it also may not have the detail level that you're looking for, right? So in this particular, these images here, right, if you think of a general LLM like ChatGPT, it's going to know a little bit about a lot, right? So it can tell you, like, where is Japan related to South Korea? What it's not necessarily going to be able to tell you is how do I get from one prefecture to another prefecture in Japan, because it doesn't have that detail level. So if you have a very specific domain, right, refer back to what we talked about with embeddings and possibly fine tuning so that you can get the level of detail that you need. Like, even the funny thing is as far as disambiguation, if you ask ChatGPT, which is an LLM, large language model, what is an LLM, it will actually respond to you with information about the Masters of Law postgraduate degree. So some of that is prompt engineering to make sure that you can help it disambiguate, and some of it may also be knowledge domain. Expectations and resilience. So you need to expect and be ready to handle long response times. Some of the systems that I have built using LLMs have very complex things that it has to do, right? So let's say you want to write an insurance denial letter. You need to consume all the policy information. You need to understand to figure out which part of the policy is why you're getting this partial denial, and be able to write it in the proper format, right? It's a lot of thinking, and those can take up to 30 seconds. That's the maximum we've seen, but again, 30 seconds, most people aren't used to APIs taking 30 seconds, right? You're probably used to 100 millisecond, 300 millisecond, and the expectation is 300 milliseconds is kind of a long time. So be ready for long response times for LLMs, and be ready to handle it. Make sure you've got timeouts set up and that your requests don't time out in your applications because it took too long, and your an FPM just kind of went all about its way. Varied response times as well. So when you're making requests to an LLM, depending on how complicated the request is, it can be very different amount of response time, but the exact same request at different times can take much longer. And one of the main reasons for that is that, like I said earlier, running an LLM model is extremely expensive, right? If you wanted to, let's say you wanted to just host something on AWS or Azure, right? Just the kind of base for running one of these larger LLMs, what people consider understand today as AI, can run you anywhere between $5,000 and $10,000 a month per instance. And those instances can only handle one request at a time. So what these APIs are doing is they're queuing up your request and waiting for one of these instances to become available. So the exact same question can take 100 milliseconds. It could take 3 seconds. So just understand that the way the systems work, they're going to be varied response times. You may get timeouts, right? It may just not respond, right? So again, these things take a very long time. I'm not sure what's making them time out. I can hypothesize that things just get stuck, things get hung, or you're in the process of you have an LLM crash or an LLM restart, but you will get timeouts. Sometimes you'll get blank answers. I don't know why, but sometimes the answer is completely blank. There's no error, just blank answer, which is a good time. So you have to be ready for that. It will oftentimes answer in the wrong format. You can spend all the time in the world fine-tuning fine-tuning is bad. You can spend all the time in the world working on your prompting, right? Your prompt engineering, but it will still return in the wrong format on occasion, right? For whatever reason, the data that you sent that time made it answer differently. It's just going to happen. So be prepared for it, and be prepared for what to do with it. Wrong answers. So it will not always respond with the correct answer, and you need to be prepared for that. And that needs to be part of your decision on what you might use it for, right? So do I want to, even if I have a medical database, do I want to use that because I can give someone the wrong answer? Is there some, do I have a liability against that, right? Or do I, or is just letting the user know that this may or may not be the correct answer is fine. Just the way LLMs work, right? Is it'll make up the wrong answer, so pick the wrong answer at times, right? And again, sometimes there'll be no response. It's just it gives you back nothing, which gets kind of crazy. And then rate limiting, right? So ChatGPT 4 is amazing, but you can't send it a lot of information at a time because it caps out at 10,000 tokens per minute. So if you have a high volume application, you have to be concerned about rate limiting, and you have to be concerned of how you're going to up your rate limiting or what to do when you hit rate limiting, because rate limits are real. Overconfidence and hallucination. So LLMs are very confident, especially ChatGPT, even when it has the wrong answer. And it will return answers that are seemingly correct. They look correct, but if you actually double check and look into what the answer was, it's completely wrong. And that's a common occurrence. Bias is the thing that people have been talking about forever with AI, right? So this is an example of a question asked to BERT, which is one of the original LLMs, and it's the basis of a lot of other LLMs. So just because it's in BERT, it's in other fine-tuned models that are out there that are based on BERT, where it determined that men work as certain types of things and women work as other types of things. So ChatGPT doesn't have this bias, but every model has bias, and every model should be publishing what its bias is. ChatGPT does not. But if you're using Hugging Face, every one of the models listed will list what its bias is against, right? Because every model has bias. Testing and monitoring. You absolutely need to test and monitor, because nothing is static, right? The models may change, right? So if you're using GPT-3.5 and they update GPT-3.5, your answers may get different and they may not work as well. The truth may change, right? You're using old data and there's new data, and so you're not accurate anymore. Or what the user wants, like you wrote a system that was really good for the users at one point, but not working as well for them based on what they need today. So monitoring over time for any types of models is important. Data privacy is another one, right? You're sending data to an LLM that can be used inside of the LLM for training later. Might be, right? Depends on the model, depends on the provider. Understand what's going on there so you're not in violation of data privacy laws. Security, make sure that it's similar to SQL, right? You don't want people injecting into the prompts, jailbreaking, or session hijacking. There's utilities for doing that and some things there, but just make sure that you understand that you need to have security on your prompts. And an AI first mindset, right? This may seem premature, but make sure that you're taking that into consideration, because I really believe that in the near future, there's going to be two types of companies. Those that are injecting AI-based technologies into their software and systems, and those that fail. It's going to get to the point where you just have to know it. So thinking first, like, is this something I can do with AI? Is it something and again, AI doesn't solve all problems, right? Is this something that makes sense for AI? Once you start using it, you have to start thinking with an AI first mindset, right? And in the last 10 seconds, I'll go really quickly through future trends and innovation, right? These are controversial topics that I'm just going to throw out there, right? I really believe that ChatGPT, things like ChatGPT and Midjourney were as transformative as Google, Amazon Web Services, and the iPhone, right? All those previous three changed how we did work as engineers, and what we did, and where we did it, and how we did it, and who the audience was. And I really think that AI is going to do the same thing. It will be everywhere. There's no way you can stop it, right? And yes, AI is a buzzword and we're in a bubble, but remember, the dot-com bubble didn't stop e-commerce when it burst. So the bubble will burst, but AI will still be there. It'll be a tool in every developer's toolbox, right? There's already a star coder plugin for VS Code. In the future, right, it hopefully will take away some of the mundane things like writing the skeleton of a class or creating a skeleton for unit tests or just a skeleton project. Instead of it just generating a generic skeleton for your project, it will generate one that's based on what you're going to use. And it'll replace traditional logic engines and decision trees. I've built a bunch of them, and I would rather do it through AI. And it will replace most existing junior developer workloads. That's a highly controversial one, but I think that's a truth. Like right now, you can take a picture, you can draw a picture of a web page, you can show it to ChatGPT, and it will generate the HTML for it. What is that going to do in 10 years? Who knows? And then it'll replace APIs, right? If I don't have to figure out how to talk to you, I can just talk to you like everything talks to you, and I can talk to everything the same way. Why would I want to have to figure out how to use an API? What we call an API today, right? That one's probably a little less likely to happen in the near future, but how things talk to things will change when you don't have to figure out the language to talk. And I appreciate you. I went very quickly at the very end to try and make it through. It's a lot of information to get in 45 minutes. Please rate the talk, and the slides are available. There. And that is it. Thank you.
That is it. So thank you, Adam, for that impressive talk. Quick remark from one of your last slides. So LMMs are going to replace AI, APIs.
Yes.
It's going to be interesting by sending, if I'm mistaken, send the beacon token or something. And if the LMM has some aggressive tone, I'm really curious about the replies, like saying, you are messing up. So that would be really interesting. So I got a couple of questions for you.
Sure.
And both of them is not easy to answer right here. So, but I'm going to try my best. So Anonymosa is asking how to implement your local free AI.
My local free AI?
Yeah. It's a tricky one. I think this one, even ChatGPT is going to be a little bit overwhelmed with the answer. But
so if you want to implement API locally, you're going to need Python. So you can't. You can absolutely do it. You can run your own models. You can run your own LLMs. Majority of the tools, you will find some tools in non-Python, but Python is the language of data scientists. It is a language of modeling. And so all the tooling is there, and so that's where most of it is. So you can absolutely, if you want to run your own free LLM, you can do that. But nothing is free, right? So in order to run one of these top LLMs, right, it's going to take a GP, the cost of the system to run one of these LLMs, the big generative AI LLMs, in an acceptable amount of time, costs at least 10,000 US.
Cheap.
Because you need a lot of RAM, you need a gigantic GPU and a lot of GPU RAM, right? So it's got to have a high bus. It's got like there's just so much stuff that it has to have. And again, like running it on AWS is super expensive as well, right? So it's like $500 a month, or you spend $10,000. So using APIs is the efficient way to do it because they're the ones losing money. They're eating the cost of it for you now, so that everybody starts using it, and then their assumption is right because I think OpenAI is actually looking at making their own chips. So as the cost goes down, they'll finally break even and start making money. Right? They're making, I think they're up to annual revenue of $3 billion, and they're still losing $1 billion a month. Right? So.
Twitter for a long time was losing money, and we still have them, and now they are starting. But that's another conversation. But Christmas is really upon us, so maybe just ask for Santa, your own local AI, maybe 10K.
If you want to know how to do that, right? Hugging Face is the place to get a lot of that information, right? Because they host the open access APIs. Or the open access models, and they're where people stick the models. So if you want to download the model or run it, you can do that from Hugging Face.
Okay, with that, great segue. It wasn't intended. Eugene Sorova is asking how easy it will be to build a text translation service. For he's giving an example: German to English using a Hugging Face API, and it will be free. And if it not, now I'm going to answer from the previous question: do I need the 10K for running locally?
So you don't need the 10K for running it locally. You can. Hugging Face will host models for you. I don't know what the cost is there. For our use case so far, we've been able to figure out how to get ChatGPT to work. So we're paying per request, which is a better model for us. And we're using it on Azure, which removes the data privacy concerns that you have with ChatGPT. But you can host models, and again, it's not as expensive. I can't remember if it's as expensive or more. It's around the same price as Amazon, but you've got an API that's going there. You don't have to write your own API to access it so that you can use it. Translations are a big thing right now. There's a lot of stuff that's moving to Chinese. But if you go look Hugging Face right now, there may be a model that is bilingual for German, and you would be able to use that. Translation is one of the things that LLMs were very good at. So depending on how long you've been using Google Translate, at one point it went from being okay to really good, and that's when they switched it from what it was using before to using an LLM. So it uses AI and it's using LLMs to do the translation because it gets the context of your message as opposed to translating each word. It's taking the sentence and the meaning of the sentence and then turning it into another language. So that technology exists and is being used in Google Translate. And on Hugging Face, there are models that are trained in multiple languages. The difficulty there being is that you have to find places where you can do that. And I wonder if it's if there's a translation for Wikipedia, there's a likelihood that it's being done. As long as they're not selling the data, right? They're angry at OpenAI because they violated the terms of service for Wikipedia by making money off of Wikipedia data. But if you're making it open source, then they're not as upset about it.
Yeah. So final remark, more as a question from my side. From your experience, did you ever end up in a situation that you a large bill will appear and you weren't prepared for it?
So you can, like, it depends. You can set quotas. So on Azure, you set quotas and you can't exceed the quota. And in for like if you're using OpenAI GPT, you're paying per request, but you can put a limit. So, and that's the other thing. Like it can get expensive, especially if you're using GPT-4. But again, like for kind of low usage applications, we've never gone over like $20 a day US. And you can through their API set maximums. If you're using Hugging Face in production, they're hosting the model, and it costs what it costs, right? It's a fixed monthly cost with them. The only ones where you're paying kind of per token that I know of right now that's really available is OpenAI. Most of the image generation stuff, it's you have a limit on how much you can do, and it's a monthly fee.
Okay. Ever been bitten by the end of the month so far?
No, haven't so far. Like there are times when I expected it to be higher than it was. We're like, I don't know how much. Like we must be hitting our limits, and the answer was no. But again, that's something to take into consideration. It's a very, very small price. Well, let me back that up. For ChatGPT 3.5, it's a very small price per token. So it's hard to get a really large bill. You need a lot of traffic with a lot of requests, and we haven't gotten there. But if you have a high, it's something you have to think about, right? That's one of the things we came in. We had a customer who's like, okay, I want to AI this thing, right? So we're like, okay, well, let's see what you're doing. You're processes 3 million records, right? Every 6 months. Well, 3 million records is going to turn into this many requests. You're going to want to use GPT-4 probably. And so you're going to be doing this many requests. And your average message size is going to be about this big. So it's going to start costing you, and what we figured out is that every 6 months, it's going to cost you $50,000. which was less than they were paying humans to do, or which is more than they were paying humans to do. So why even bother?
Yeah.
So it's something that you should take into consideration is the cost. And again, so for that one, the answer may be, well, maybe we don't do it with GPT. We go with a hosted solution, but we have to see if we can find a hosted solution that'll work as well. They're harder to test out when you're using something, say, like on Hugging Face. You can test them out. You got to spin them up and see if it'll give you the right answer. But they tend not to be as polished as like a Chat GPT because there are people constantly working to make it polished. It's a product that people are making money on, so they're constantly working to make it better, as opposed to a lot of these models are more research, and that people use those models to make other things they're going to make money off of. So if you're not someone who's comfortable doing fine tuning, you may not find the models on Hugging Face as useful.
Okay. Thank you for the answer. And
Oh, no
thanks
problem.
for all the insights on this AI stuff. So thanks, Adam, once again, and I will see you next year. Bye-bye.
Awesome.